Hi there, I'm Yana, and today I want to share 10 things that I wish I knew before studying psychology. I feel like there's so much misinformation about what psychology is as a field, and I think that quite a few people get surprised when they start studying psychology and it's not what they were expecting, or it's not the same as what they might have heard. And I also wanted to share this because there's a lot of information about going to med school, going to law school, but there's not much information about psychology, so hope to change that. So just a bit about me. I'm currently doing honours in psychology at the University of Melbourne, and I did my Bachelor's of Arts majoring in psychology and anthropology. And in high school, in year 11 and 12, I did psychology as one of my subjects. So I feel like I got just enough knowledge to speak on this topic. So first I'll go over some things that might apply only to Australia. I'm not 100% sure about the education system or the pathway in other countries, but I assume it's fairly similar. But do keep watching for things in general about a psychology major. So the first thing I wanted to go over is how to actually become a psychologist in Australia. So to become a psychologist in Australia, you have to go through 3 years of an undergraduate degree majoring in psychology, plus a 4th year either as an advanced diploma or a honours year, and 2 years of masters, which includes supervised placement for a certain amount of hours. Another thing to think about is that all the subjects and courses that you take, they have to be accredited by APAC, which is the governing body of psychologists in Australia. And once you complete the masters, you go to do a psychology exam and registration with Australian Psychological Association. So essentially it's a minimum of 7 years of study. And so that leads me to the next point. When I started psychology, I didn't realize how competitive it would get, especially to get into honours and to get into masters. I think this is because psychology is a protected profession, so you're not actually allowed to call yourself a psychologist unless you've gone through the necessary education and you've passed the exam and you've registered with the board. And so there's a kind of like bottleneck at the honours level when you're going from 3rd year into honours. And most universities have a fairly high cutoff mark. The minimum would be like 70, 75 at most universities, but because there's so much competition, the cutoff mark is pretty close to 80%. And there's also another bottleneck at the master's level. Except for the masters, you don't only need the grades to get in, but you also need to show that you have experience. And that is assessed at the interview process. Roughly the grade that you need to get into a master's is around 80 to 85 is kind of the cutoff mark I've seen, but apparently it's pretty rare to get in on your first go, especially if you did honours just last year. And most people end up getting some experience either volunteering or as a research assistant before going on and applying for masters. Another thing I didn't realize is that there's more to psychology than becoming a psychologist. And there's so many different career pathways that a psychology degree can take you. So the first thing is that there's an option to do a graduate diploma. So if you already have a degree, an undergraduate degree in another area, you can choose to do a 2-year graduate and advanced diploma, which will lead you straight to masters once you complete that. In some cases, you could do an internship as well, where masters is not required, but you just have to take a bit longer time to do unsupervised training. But I hear that's being phased out. It's still worth to have a look at all the different pathways. There's also counselling and social work. So for counselling and social work, there's separate degrees that you can do. I know you can do even just a diploma at TAFE. My understanding, counselling is not as regulated, and it uses talk therapy, but it's a bit more holistic. And social work, to my understanding, is kind of like casework. You work with individuals, families, and the community, and you connect them to different services. So it's, like counselling, it's a bit more of a holistic approach to well-being. rather than just focusing on mental health issues and talk therapy. You can also work in an organizational setting, things like marketing, HR, all of these fields, they love psychology majors because we know how to work with people, we understand people. There's a Masters of Applied Psychology that you can take, and that is specifically looking at practical applications of psychology in a business setting. But I don't even think that you need another degree on top of that to get into one of those areas, especially like an entry-level job. And that leads me kind of to my next point. The bulk of psychology is actually non-clinical, and there's so many different fields ranging from like sports psychology, music psychology, personality, cognitive, developmental. And within that, there's smaller subfields like memory, decision-making, and even smaller research interests. For example, I'm doing my honours thesis on curiosity. And I know there's researchers at my uni who are looking at the aha moment, and people who are looking at consciousness and vegetarianism and objectification theory. Like, there's so much different things. Any kind of human behavior or thought process that you can think of, psychologists study that. Another thing that I found out is that you don't necessarily have to choose one thing, research or clinical work. You can do both. There's quite a few lecturers at my university who see clients maybe like 1 and 2 days, and then for the other 3 days they research or they teach. And I think that's what I want to do in the future. Now, a bit of a segue point, you don't actually learn how to be a psychologist in undergrad, or what a psychologist actually does in detail. And you certainly don't learn how to diagnose people. Most of your degree will be taken up by looking at different fields of psychology. So in first year, you get a taster of all the different kind of fields of psychology. You learn a lot about the classical theories and all the classic studies. And in second year, you expand on that. And then as you go through your second year and your third year, you realize that most of what you learned in your first year is actually wrong. Which leads me to my next point. So what you had previously learned about psychology is actually wrong. You don't learn how to read people, and you can't read people, and you can't tell if someone's lying. And in fact, like, one of the biggest takeaways that I got from my degree is just how insanely different we all are. And what you do get out of a psychology degree is learning about different processes behind our behavior, our feelings, our thoughts, and interactions in society. And it's not something you can use to read people or manipulate people, I'm sorry, but it provides you a better understanding of other people and yourself. And I guess in that way you can see how it is useful in things like marketing or HR, where you do need to work with other people and you do need to navigate social relations. A lot of articles on psychology are pretty outdated, especially things like psychology facts that you see on Pinterest or Instagram or Tumblr. A lot of them don't really have any scientific backing, especially not in modern day terms. And there's quite a lot that are just made up. I think like the main reason for that is that media tends to sensationalize certain aspects of psychology. For example, there's this massive obsession with Freud. I think he's pretty overrated, especially in the general media. In first year classes, you generally start off with Freud and you learn how his theories are generally not very well regarded today, and how his theories are very unscientific and have no evidence behind them. And actually William James is where it's at. Like, I don't know why the general public doesn't talk about William James, who's the real grandfather of psychology and whose writings on psychology are still referenced today. And that leads me to my next point. Psychology is a science. So one thing, doing an arts degree and then coming in to do psychology, it's a bit of a culture shock. I'm not relying on elegant theories made up 50 years ago. It's all based on scientific evidence and following the scientific method. So like I've said earlier, Freud's theories are not considered seriously anymore because they're not scientific. All fields of psychology, including psychotherapy, follow the scientific method, which involves forming a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis with an experiment or systematic observation, and then either confirming or disproving the hypothesis. So as I mentioned earlier, you learn a lot about classical theories in first year, and these are the theories that tend to get picked up by the media because they're very simple and easy to explain, I guess. However, they're not entirely accurate, and that's because new research generates new conclusions and then new theories come from that, and research is constantly being updated. And one of the surprising parts that I learned is that psychology is part of STEM technically, but it's a bit different to other sciences, especially sciences like physics and chemistry, which leads me to my next couple of points. Ethics plays a major role in psychology, and one of the things I didn't realize is how central it is to the field, not just because you need to be an ethical psychologist, but also because you need to consider ethics when you're doing research. And I guess this is why you don't get too much hands-on experience, or you don't really get to see how psychologists actually work, because there's things like confidentiality, respect that has to be protected. And so I guess it depends between different degree structures. But for example, in my fourth year, we had a whole class on ethics, and in third year, we've spent quite a bit on ethics as well. But you do learn the basics from the first year, the basic principles, and then you dive in a bit deeper into the research and psychologist codes of ethics. In Australia, there's the APA Code of Ethics and the NHMRC Code of Ethics for researchers, which psychologists and researchers have to adhere to. And that basically means you can't conduct crazy social experiments, or that you might have heard about. But you do learn about all the pretty interesting and crazy, questionable experiments that were done in the past, and other reasons why these codes were created in the first place. Another thing I didn't realize I'd have to be learning in psychology is statistics. Actually, it was a big shock for me. Didn't realize how much statistics was actually involved. You'll have to learn almost an advanced level of statistics by the end of your third and fourth year. Especially in honours, we're doing our own research projects, and that involves pretty much coming up with a research design and collecting data and analysing that data. Psychological experiments or studies usually involve a large number of participants answering questionnaires or some other kind of behavior that is measured and quantified, and then that data is analyzed using statistical analysis. And another thing that I actually learned fairly late in my degree is that statistics can be wrong. It's not like chemistry where you measure something, an experiment either works or doesn't work, proving or disproving your hypothesis. The wrong application of a statistical test can result in either like a false positive or a false negative. And there's always about 5% chance that that particular statistical test or result is due to chance. So you can't say that you confirm or prove your hypothesis. You can either support it or not support it. In fact, there's a whole underbelly of psychology where researchers use questionable methods and the wrong statistical analysis in order to support their theory. And lastly, you'll probably have to learn how to code, especially in third and fourth year. So code is used in a lot of statistical programs to a varying degree depending on the program. For example, SPSS, one statistical program which is really popular, it uses a bit of code if you want to get a bit more heavy with the analysis. Or if, for example, in my third year class, we had to learn R, and that's basically like a sandbox tool that you can write code, you can write web applications, programs on it, but you can also conduct statistical analysis, which has to be written in code. Also, code is used in experiments, and if you're doing an honours project where you have to do like a computer experiment, or you're analysing some brain imaging data from MRI, for example, you will have to learn some code in order to handle these things. And so that was my list of 10 things that I wish I would have known before starting psychology.